emptied into concrete hoppers. From these hoppers, vibrator feeders feed the coal onto underground belt conveyors, which convey it to a point above ground level. Here, the direction is changed and the coal is fed onto incline conveyors which deliver it either to the stocking out plant or to the bunkers in the boiler house. In one of the junction towers, magnetic separators are installed whose duty is to extract any tramp iron which may have found its way into the coal. A large steel bolt, for instance, could cause quite a nuisance if allowed to enter the PF mills. Any large pieces of coal are separated on this vibrating screen and are then crushed before being returned to the main coal stream. Trippers deposit coal into chutes which feed the bunkers. The trippers can be moved into position over any bunker which is in need of restocking. The cycle is now almost complete. After being pulverized in the mills situated in the boiler house basement, the coal is blown along fuel pipes to the coal burners, together with the necessary primary combustion air. For starting up, the burners are ignited by means of the auxiliary oil burners. One of the oil burners is here seen in operation and is being viewed through an inspection window at the rear of the boiler furnace. On raising steam pressure, the turbine is run up to speed, and after carrying out mechanical and electrical tests, the alternator is excited and energizes its own generator transformer, which is seen in this view. The machine is synchronized from the main control room. The generator output is now feeding into the national grid. The final chapters of this station have not yet been written, and considerable changes in power station design will be brought about before the last set is steaming. Nevertheless, the station is a tribute to the skill of the architect, the designers, the contractors, and all those whose labor went to its construction.
from seeing anything. Caroline Gray reports.
They turned out in their force to watch the towers at the Castle Donington power station come down. Many of them have been employed there over the last 30 years and had grown attached to the place. But it was not to be. Shrouded in mist, the last moments were lost. All they could do was listen and remember.
I was very disappointed, actually. We all work there. I helped build the place.
I'm disappointed too. I spent 30 years here, 30 happy years, and it was very disappointing not to see it.
They could have waited another half hour just to let, you know, the amount of people that turned up to see it, you know.
When it was first built in 1958, the Castle Donington power station was considered state-of-the-art. Now, though, it's been demolished because it's outdated.
It was an old power station. It had a good record in operational terms, but was no longer efficient, and therefore other more efficient stations in the power generating portfolio were bearing all the load in the country.
As the mist settled, the crowds were able to see what's left of the place that had employed them for so long.
The power station was blown up despite pleas to wait until thick fog lifted. Emma Hurd reports.
People had waited since dawn for the dramatic explosion, but when it came, it was hardly a spectacle. Behind the fog, two chimneys, once 425 feet high, had been blasted to the ground. The residents who'd hoped to see them go felt cheated.
It's disgusting, really, to think that they couldn't have waited. It's clearing now. What, there's another, I'd say an hour, it would have been visible.
It would be nice if they had waited, if they could have waited. Why they didn't, I haven't no idea.
If you look now, the weather's closing in yet again. I mean, we could have been in all day waiting for a suitable period for people to watch it, but meanwhile we may have lost the safety factor that we needed.
The chimneys were part of what was once the biggest power station in Europe. It closed last year after almost 40 years in service. PowerGen now plans to demolish the cooling towers next year. It's hoped the residents will at least get to see that piece of history disappear.
Today, Castle Donington was the biggest and most powerful high-tech power station in Europe, but its owners say it's now outdated. The site will be redeveloped. Ashley Gething has this report.
It was the shortage of electricity in post-war Britain that led to the construction of Castle Donington Power Station. Sandwiched between Derby and Nottingham, it was designed to produce enough power to supply over 500,000 people. The station was a byword for reliability and efficiency, but by the 1990s it had become surplus to requirements.
It was an old power station. It had a good record in operational terms, but was no longer efficient, and therefore other more efficient stations in the power generating portfolio were bearing all the load in the country, and therefore Castle Donington was no longer required.
For local people, the station has remained an important element in their lives, providing high-quality employment and good fun.
There's a lot of memories, lots of memories. Chasing the hares, catching rabbits, putting the dead ones across the box and warming them up and giving them to the blokes. Practical jokes, you know.
People travelled a long way to see a part of their working lives go up in smoke, but it was mist, not smoke, that obscured the view, an inauspicious end to a happy working life.
I spent 30 years here, 30 happy years, and it was very disappointing not to see it.
Like losing a member of the family. I've been there so long.
It was rather disappointing considering what it's been to the people, local people, you know, because of all our good jobs.
Castle Donington's cooling towers are due to disappear next year. On the rubble of the power station, a new industrial park is going to be built.
Giant cooling towers have been blown up in a controlled explosion at a former power station. They've dominated the skyline for the past 40 years, as Karen Whiteman reports.
Just after 8 this morning, and these local landmarks near Castle Donington in Leicestershire were reduced to rubble. The cooling towers have dominated the skyline for the past 40 years. When the plant was built, it was the biggest of its kind in Europe. Its 600 megawatt output supplied electricity to more than 500,000 people. But this generation of power stations is now being replaced with cleaner, more efficient methods of production. Owners PowerGen closed the Castle Donington plant 2 years ago. When demolition is completed, the site will be put up for redevelopment.
Wait into the starting gun, look, cross country.
Them blokes stood there.
Hey up! Hey!
Hey up!
What a shot.
Shaking that ice. Brilliant. Shit in the centre. I'm good for shit.
Can you do it again? I missed it.
Let's have the building. He painted that endearing picture of his cheerful little tank engine. But for the last 34 years, there's been living proof that the Thomases of this world do exist. Castle Donington No. 1 has been hard at work shunting coal wagons and generally organising life at this Trent Valley power station. When it opened in 1958, Castle Donington was the biggest coal-fired power station of its kind in Europe. The owners needed the best machinery, and that of course included the very best steam engines. Now though, with the inevitable march of time, the less exciting but more efficient diesel shunters have taken over. So why hang on to these reminders of times past?
I think affection, you know, the lads are attached to them, they're very good for public relations. We have a steam day each year, and we have visitors and give them rides.
In keeping with the tradition of Audrey's railway books, No. 1's driver is all you'd expect him to be. Well-rounded, cheerful and easygoing, seemingly without a care in the world. Not surprising, as he's been with the engine since it arrived at the power station and feels he has the measure of this little workhorse.
I think this one's got a good character. It steams well, it pulls well, it's quiet running. That's about all, I think.
Fair praise indeed, if rather concise. Although the shunter's duties are a lot lighter 30 years on, back in the 1950s, when Castle Donington was a prime provider for the national grid, the engine barely had a chance to draw steam.
8 hours on round the clock, and sometimes it used to be 12 hours, 16 hours. And the engine was working 24 hours a day. They used to work for about 10 days, and then they have a day off for a washout, the boiler washout, and then put back in service again.
Realistically, though, the engine is noisy, dirty, and takes several hours to get up fully into steam. So has No. 1 a real future, especially as the bigger power stations in the system mean that Castle Donington's workload's not as great as it used to be. I wondered whether the genial controller had any idea how long they'd stay in service.
Well, we're good for another 15 years, and they'll be at least that long. Why shouldn't they go on forever?
Steam? For the trains, maybe, but steam still powers almost all our electricity. However many desktop computers we have, or pop-up toasters, videos, or electric cars, there's still the old business of boiling water to make steam. It may look quite fancy these days, but in essence, someone is heating a kettle to make the steam, to drive the turbines, to create the electricity, to pop up the toast each morning. The kettles are also fancy, but any old-time steam engineer would soon know what's going on, even if he might then wonder where the old flat hat has gone. But here at Castle Donington, he would feel more at home outside. At this power station, they can still use steam, not just to generate electricity, but like they always did, to bring coal to the furnaces. And the man in charge of this particular fragment of history is Lionel Gadsby.
I think we are the last. I think that as regards to electricity, we are the last.
The very last to use steam to bring the coal to make steam.
Working conditions, actually, is up to the neck in filth. Coal dust, all elements, bad weather, draft, rain. We're in a diesel cab, it's like being in a car. But it's a living machine. You can do anything with it, and it's always there when you need the power. The power is unlimited. You've got so much power on the diesel, and when you've used it, you're finished. But with a steam engine, if you break down and you think it's not too serious, you can always get home with it.
This 040 is one of a pair built in Newcastle upon Tyne in 1954 for the express purpose of taking coal from the main line to the place where it was needed. And steam used to do this sort of job all over the country, such as taking the coal and the ore to the furnaces.